The immense respect and admiration that readers continue to confer on the Sage of Concord derive in part from the ongoing influence of his writing on our innermost experiences. Emerson's essays and addresses give his readers access to a field of seemingly infinite potentiality that Emerson named self-reliance. But Emerson would not become the figure Harold Bloom has called the central man of American literature until after he decided to sever his ties to a prior career to which his birth and inclinations had seemingly destined him. 7 generations of Emerson's ancestors had been ministers. His grandfather had served as a chaplain in the Revolutionary War. His father had been minister at First Church, Boston. In the diary that he kept during his college years at Harvard, Emerson wrote that he had inherited from his grandfather and his father a passionate love for the strains of eloquence. And pulpits like the one in this church offered the best way to act on this passion. Emerson took up his birthright when he accepted the position of associate minister of the Second Church of Boston in 1829. Then, in a radical departure from his family's tradition, he decided to resign his clerical position on September 9, 1832. To apprise the congregation of rationale, Emerson preached a sermon entitled The Lord's Supper, explaining that in good conscience he could no longer administer the sacrament of Holy Communion. Emerson held that the bread and the wine were symbolic, as were Christ's body and blood. Both were metaphors of the spiritual state of becoming one with God. In place of reenacting the communion ritual, Emerson thereafter aligned his consciousness with a spiritual event, the revelation of the infinitude of the solitary self that he believed the ceremony of the Lord's Supper had occulted. The decision to withdraw from the ministry was the most significant event in Emerson's life. In resigning his position as minister, Emerson had given up his institutional affiliation, his mandated social position, and his professional identity. How could the descendant of generations of ministers reject a vocation representing his lineage's highest aspirations to take up a new and what he called a higher vocation that could not even be said to exist? Emerson's resignation elicited expectable contradictory responses from his peers. When a group of ministers complained that Emerson's sermon on the Lord's Supper would surely lead the youth in his church on the path to hell, Edward Taylor, the real-life model for Herman Melville's Father Mapple, remarked that it may well be that Emerson is going to hell, but of one thing I am certain: he will change the climate there, and a general emigration will soon head that way. Following his resignation, Emerson refused to conform to any principle of association other than the infinitude of the creative self, the effect and the cause of his act of resignation. Emerson replaced the Christian tradition with self-reliance as the authority in whose name he now addressed his audience. The crisis in vocation that Emerson thereafter communicated to all of his listeners recalled them to a sense of self that, while beyond the capacity to be represented within ordained social positions, nevertheless potentiated capabilities of thought and response and action to which they would have otherwise remained ignorant. James A. Garfield, future President of the United States, could not remember a single sentence from Emerson's address to the student body during his senior year at Williams College, yet he dated the beginning of his intellectual life to that afternoon. John J. Chapman attested the power of Emerson's sentences to get driven into your mind like nails, and on them catch and hang your own experiences, till what was once his thought had become your character. Emerson followed his resignation from the Second Church of Boston with a series of manifestos: Nature in 1836, The American Scholar in 1837, the Divinity School Address in 1838, in which he announced his liberation respectively from determinations by nature, by school, and by religious creed. Insofar as each of these manifestos reenacted his severance from a mandated identity, they retroactively endowed the drama of his resignation from the Second Church of Boston with the qualities of the primal scene of his writing and his speaking. Can you discern traces of this primal scene in your readings of Emerson's essays?